The day my husband was buried, I kept looking at the church doors, not because I thought he would walk in, but because I thought my family would. They never did. While I was standing beside his coffin, they were raising champagne glasses at my sister's engagement party. And that was the moment I realized something terrifying. I hadn't just lost my husband, I had lost my entire family. I always thought the worst day of my life would be the day my husband died. I was wrong. The worst day of my life was the day I buried him and realized I was standing alone. My name is Jessica. I'm 31 years old. And on the day Daniel was laid to rest, nobody from my family showed up. Not my mother, not my father, not my little sister, not even my best friend. They were all at my sister's engagement party. I wish I could say that sentence doesn't still feel unreal. But it does. The morning of the funeral, the sky was gray and heavy, like it knew something sacred was about to happen. The air felt thick in my lungs. Every breath was work. I remember staring at myself in the mirror before leaving the house. My black dress hung loosely on me. My eyes were swollen from nights without sleep. Daniel's side of the bed was still untouched. His shoes were still by the door. His coffee mug was still in the sink. The world had already stopped for me. But apparently, it hadn't stopped for everyone else. When I arrived at the chapel, people were already gathering outside. Daniel's coworkers, our neighbors, a few old friends. They nodded gently when they saw me. Soft eyes, quiet sympathy. But behind their kindness was something else. Confusion. Because I arrived alone. And as the minutes passed, I stayed alone. I kept glancing at the parking lot. Every car that pulled in made my heart jump. Maybe that's them. Maybe they came after all. Maybe they realized this mattered more. But the cars that pulled in never belonged to my family. Inside the chapel, I stood at the front near the casket. The wood was polished so perfectly it reflected the lights above. I kept staring at it, hoping it would feel real eventually. It didn't. My hands were shaking so badly I had to lock my fingers together just to stop them from trembling, and every few seconds I looked back at the doors, waiting, hopping, praying. I imagined my mom rushing in, breathless, whispering, "I'm so sorry, sweetheart." I imagined my dad's stiff walk as he sat in the front row. I imagined my sister running in with tears, ruining her makeup. Even Chloe, my best friend since high school. I pictured her slipping quietly into a pew, giving me that look that said, "I'm here now. You're not alone." But the doors never opened. They stayed shut. The silence inside that chapel screamed louder than anything. When the pastor began speaking, his voice felt distant, like it was underwater. He talked about love, about loyalty, about how Daniel always showed up for people. That phrase hit me like a slap. Showed up. Daniel showed up for everyone. Birthdays, emergencies, late night phone calls. He was always there, and the one day I needed people to show up for me, they didn't. Whispers began floating through the pews behind me. Where's her family? I thought she was close to her parents. Did something happen? Every whisper was like a small cut, not enough to knock me down, but enough to make sure I felt every second of it. I tried to focus on Daniel instead, his crooked smile. The way he squeezed my hand twice when he didn't want to say "I love you" out loud. The way he looked at me like I was the only person in the room. He chose me, without conditions, without comparisons, without ever making me feel second place. And standing there, staring at his closed casket, I realized something terrifying. He had been the only one who ever truly chose me. Because my family never really had. They tolerated me. They expected me to be strong. But they didn't choose me. And that day proved it. Because I knew exactly where they were. I could picture it so clearly it made me sick. My sister Emily, standing in a decorated hall under golden lights, holding out her hand so everyone could admire her ring. My mother smiling proudly beside her. My father shaking hands and congratulating his future son-in-law. Music playing. The champagne glasses clinking, laughter filling the room. While I stood beside a coffin, when it was time to lower the casket, my legs almost gave out. The sky seemed darker somehow, the ropes tightened. There was that soft mechanical sound, as Daniel's casket slowly began to descend. That sound will never leave me. And that's when my phone vibrated. At first, I ignored it, but it kept vibrating. I looked down. Mom, one message. Before I could even process it, more notifications appeared. Missed call, missed call, missed call. They stacked on top of each other so fast. I couldn't keep up. When it finally stopped, I counted them. 36 missed calls. 36. While my husband was being buried. While dirt was about to cover him forever. Now she wanted to talk. Not when I called her 2 nights before, sobbing and begging her to come. Not when I said, Mom, I can't do this alone. Not when I told her I was scared. But now that it was too late, my hands felt numb holding that phone. My heart wasn't pounding with hope. It was pounding with something colder. Rage. I could already hear her excuses in my head. The engagement party had been planned for months. Relatives flew in. Canceling would have caused drama. Emily would have been devastated. As if I wasn't, I slipped the phone back into my pocket without answering. Dirt hit the casket with dull thuds. Each one sounded like a door closing. Each one sounded final, and in that moment, something inside me cracked open completely. Because as Daniel disappeared beneath the ground, I realized I wasn't just burying my husband. I was burying the illusion that my family would ever choose me when it truly mattered. As people slowly began to leave, offering awkward hugs and quiet condolences, I stayed frozen in place, staring at the fresh mound of earth, knowing that when I walked away from that grave, I wouldn't be walking back to the same life. And I had no idea, yet, that this was only the beginning. Because when I finally looked at my phone again, the messages had changed, and what they said next would hurt even more than their absence. When I finally got back to my car, I didn't start the engine. I just sat there. The funeral flowers were still in my hands. White lilies, Daniel's favorite. My phone was lying in the cup holder, silent now. But the screen still showed the proof. 36 missed calls. More messages had come in while I stood by the grave. Frozen. Dad, Emily. Chloe. All of them suddenly urgent. All of them suddenly available. I stared at the screen for a long time before opening the first message. It was from my mom. Jessica, please call me. This isn't what you think. Isn't what I think? I let out a sound that didn't even feel like it came from me. A broken laugh. Dry and hollow. What else was I supposed to think? They weren't there. There was no misunderstanding about that. There was no misunderstanding about that. I opened my sister's message next. Jess, please don't make this bigger than it is. We'll explain. Don't make this bigger than it is. My husband had just been lowered into the ground. What exactly was the appropriate size for that? Then Chloe. Please answer. I didn't know it would hurt you this much. That line made something inside me twist. Didn't know it would hurt me this much. What did they expect? That I would nod politely while they chose balloons and champagne over a funeral? That I would smile and say, "It's okay, I understand." The worst part wasn't even their absence. The worst part wasn't even their absence. It was their surprise that I was hurt. Like my pain was inconvenient. Like my grief was dramatic. I rested my forehead against the steering wheel and closed my eyes, and for a moment, I let myself remember how this had started, 2 weeks earlier, when Daniel was still in the hospital, when the doctors had gently told me there was nothing more they could do. I had called my mom that night. I remember sitting on the cold hospital floor outside Daniel's room, my voice shaking. Mom, I need you. She had gone quiet for a second. Then she said, Sweetheart, Emily's engagement party is next weekend. Everyone's flying in. I remember blinking, confused. I know. But Daniel, he might not make it that long. She sighed, a tired sigh. Let's not think negatively. That was her response. Let's not think negatively. As if hope alone could hold him here. As if I was overreacting, I should have known then. I should have understood that I was already second place. Again. Back in the car, I opened the longest message from my mom. It was paragraphs. She explained that the engagement party had been planned for months. Relatives had booked flights. Deposits had been paid. Canceling would have caused a scene. She said they assumed I would understand because I've always been strong. Strong. That word hit harder than anything else. I've heard that word my entire life. Jessica is strong. Jessica can handle it. Jessica doesn't need as much attention. When I didn't get the lead role in the school play because Emily cried harder, I was strong. When Emily needed extra help with college and my savings were borrowed to support her, I was strong. When holidays revolved around her moods, her needs, her milestones, I was strong. Strong never meant resilient. It meant quiet. It meant flexible. It meant invisible. I stared at my reflection in the dark screen of my phone. And for the first time in my life, I didn't want to be strong. I wanted to be chosen. I typed a response, deleted it, typed again, deleted it. My fingers were shaking. Finally, I wrote, "You chose a party over my husband's funeral. There is nothing left to explain." I hit send before I could second guess myself. The phone rang almost instantly. Mom. I watched it vibrate in my hand. I didn't answer. It stopped, then rang again, then Dad, then Emily. For once, I didn't rush to fix it. For once, I didn't smooth things over. For once, I let them sit in the discomfort. When I finally drove home, the house felt wrong, too quiet, too still. Daniel's shoes were still by the door. His jacket was still hanging on the chair. The faint scent of his cologne still lingered in the hallway. I walked into the living room and sank onto the couch without even taking off my coat. The silence wrapped around me. And that's when the doorbell rang. I froze. It couldn't be. The bell rang again and again. I stood slowly and walked to the door. When I opened it, Emily was standing there, still wearing her engagement ring, still perfectly styled. Her makeup slightly smudged, like she'd been crying, but not enough to ruin it. She didn't wait for an invitation. She stepped inside. "Jessica, please," she said, her voice trembling. "I never meant for it to turn out like this." I crossed my arms. "Like what?" She looked uncomfortable. "Like you feeling abandoned. You feeling abandoned. Not we abandoned you. Not we failed you. Just my feelings. I begged you to come," I said quietly. She shook her head. She shook her head. "You know how much pressure there was. Everyone was already there. The photographer, the catering, the relatives. My husband was being buried." Her lips tightened. Daniel would have understood. That was the moment something inside me went cold. I looked at her slowly. "You don't get to speak for him." She blinked, surprised. "I'm just saying he would have wanted the family to be happy. My husband was in the ground, and life doesn't stop." She snapped. The words hung between us. For a second, I thought I misheard her. She swallowed but didn't back down. "You're making everything about your grief." It was my engagement, Jessica. One of the biggest days of my life. I stared at her, and suddenly, I wasn't looking at my little sister anymore. I was looking at someone who had always been allowed to shine brighter. I was looking at someone who had always been allowed to shine brighter, someone who had always come first. "You are right," I said softly. Her face flickered with relief. "I am making this about my grief, because that's what this is. Grief, not competition, not scheduling conflict, not bad timing. Grief." She didn't respond. For the first time in her life, she didn't have a counter-argument. "Please leave," I said calmly. Her eyes widened. "Are you serious?" "Yes." She hesitated, then her face hardened. "You're being selfish." There it was. The truth. Not sadness. Not guilt. Anger. Because I wasn't playing my role. Because I wasn't being strong. I walked to the door and opened it. She stood there for a moment, then walked out without another word. She stood there for a moment, then walked out without another word. When the door shut, the house felt quieter than before. But it didn't feel heavier, it felt clearer. And that scared me, because for the first time in my life, I wasn't trying to earn their love. I was finally questioning if I even wanted it, and the truth I was beginning to see was about to change everything. Was about to change everything. After Emily left, the house felt different. Not emptier, not heavier. Just exposed. Like someone had finally turned on a light in a room I had avoided my whole life. In a room I had avoided my whole life. I stood there for a long time, staring at the closed door. Her words echoed in my head. "You're being selfish." Selfish. For burying my husband. For wanting my parents there. For expecting my best friend to choose a funeral over finger food and fairy lights. If that was selfish, then maybe I had been selfless for far too long. My phone rang again. Dad. I watched his name flash across the screen. I already knew this call would be different. Mom would plead, Emily would defend. But Dad would calculate. The phone stopped ringing. Then it buzzed with a voicemail notification. I didn't listen to it right away. I walked into the kitchen instead. Daniel's coffee mug was still sitting in the sink from 3 days ago. I hadn't been able to wash it. It felt too final. I leaned against the counter and finally pressed play. Dad's voice filled the quiet kitchen. Jessica, we need to handle this like adults. Handle this like this was a scheduling mistake, like someone forgot to RSVP, he continued. We have done everything for you, your whole life. Everything. And this is how you respond, by cutting us off. I closed my eyes. Here it comes. We paid for your education. We supported you when you moved out. We were there when you got married. Each sentence felt like an invoice, like he was reading from a list, a debt I apparently owed. And then he said it. Family doesn't abandon each other over one misunderstanding. One misunderstanding. My husband's funeral, reduced to a miscommunication. I felt something inside me settle. Not anger. Not rage. Not rage. Just clarity. I picked up the phone and called him back. He answered immediately. Good, he said. You're thinking clearly now. No, I replied calmly. I'm thinking clearly for the first time. There was a pause. What does that mean? It means love isn't a transaction. Silence. You don't get credit for raising your child. That's your responsibility. His breathing changed slightly. You don't get to say you've done everything for me and then disappear when I need you most. We didn't disappear. You were at a party. That party was important to your sister. And my husband's funeral wasn't important. His voice sharpened. You're twisting this. I'm finally seeing it. The line went silent for a moment. Then he changed tactics. You have always been strong, Jessica. We knew you could handle it. There it was again. Strong. You didn't think I needed you. That's not what I said. But it's what you meant. He didn't answer, because he knew it was true. For years I had been the easy child, the understanding one, the flexible one. Emily cried louder. Emily demanded more. Emily needed more attention. So I adjusted. I swallowed. I stepped back. I became strong. And somehow that turned into invisible. I needed my parents, I said softly. Not accusatory, not yelling, just honest. And you weren't there. He exhaled slowly. You're emotional right now. Of course I was. My husband was gone. But emotion didn't make me wrong. It made me human. I won't argue, I said. You made your choice. And what is that supposed to mean? It means I'm done pretending this didn't happen. The silence stretched longer this time. Then he said something that surprised me. So what? You're cutting us off. I thought about that. About holidays. About birthdays. About pretending. No, I answered. I'm stepping back. That's dramatic. No, it's necessary. He sounded frustrated now. You're overreacting. Maybe, I said calmly. But if I am, I'll deal with the consequences. And with that, I ended the call. My hands weren't shaking anymore. My voice hadn't cracked. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel like a child defending myself. I felt like a woman setting a boundary. The next few days were strangely quiet. The calls slowed. The messages became shorter, then they stopped altogether. And something unexpected happened. The silence didn't suffocate me. It relieved me. I woke up one morning and realized I hadn't checked my phone once during the night. I wasn't waiting for explanations. I wasn't bracing for guilt. I wasn't rehearsing conversations in my head. It was just quiet. I started going through Daniel's things slowly. Not all at once. Just one drawer at a time. One shelf. One memory. I found little notes he had hidden inside books. Tiny messages like, you, stronger than you think. And I choose you, every day. Those words hit differently now, because he had chosen me, not because I was easy, not because I was convenient, but because he wanted to. And that realization brought both pain and power. At work, people treated me gently. They brought coffee, left small cards on my desk. One coworker sat with me during lunch without saying much, just presence. That's what showing up looks like. It doesn't require perfection. It requires care. Even my neighbor knocked on my door one evening with a homemade casserole. "I just didn't want you to feel alone," she said awkwardly. And I almost laughed at the contrast. Strangers showed up. My own family did not. That truth stopped hurting the way it did at first. Instead, it started teaching me something. Family isn't about blood. It's about presence. About who stands beside you when everything falls apart. About who stands beside you when everything falls apart. One afternoon, about 3 weeks later, I finally listened to the last voicemail from my mom. Her voice was shaky. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't think. I should have been there. I didn't know how to handle both things." For the first time, she sounded small, not defensive, not dismissed, just human. I didn't feel anger listening to it. I felt distance, like I was hearing it from far away. And in that distance, I found something I hadn't expected: peace. I didn't need her apology to heal. I didn't need her to understand fully. I just needed space. So I sent one message: "I need time. I'm choosing myself right now." She replied with a heart emoji. That was it. No argument. No guilt. Just a symbol. And somehow, that felt like the most honest thing she'd sent me. That night, I stood in the living room alone. The house was still quiet, still different, but no longer unbearable. I looked at Daniel's photo on the shelf. "I'm going to be okay," I said out loud. The words felt fun, agile, but they were real. I won't beg to be chosen anymore. And that was the moment everything shifted. Because losing him broke me, but being abandoned by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally, that rebuilt me into someone who knew her worth. And I didn't know it yet, but the real turning point wasn't over. Because sometimes when you stop chasing people, they start realizing what they lost. And what my family did next proved that walking away was the best decision I ever made. There's something people don't tell you about silence. It makes others uncomfortable, especially the ones who are used to you explaining yourself, apologizing, fixing things. I stopped doing all of that, and that's when they started unraveling. It had been almost a month since the funeral. I had settled into a strange rhythm. Wake up, go to work, come home, sort through one small piece of Daniel's world at a time. Cry when I needed to, sleep when I could. And most importantly, I stopped checking my phone obsessively. At first, the quiet felt sharp. Now, it felt steady, peaceful, until one Saturday morning when that peace cracked. I was in the kitchen, pouring coffee when there was a knock at the door. Not a doorbell. A knock, slow, with her, deliberate. My stomach tightened. I already knew. When I opened the door, my mother was standing there. She looked smaller than I remembered. No makeup. Hair pulled back loosely. She wasn't dressed like someone coming from a party this time. She looked unsure. I didn't move aside immediately. For the first time in my life, I didn't rush to make her comfortable. "What are you doing here?" I asked. She swallowed. "I just wanted to see you. You have seen me." She flinched slightly. "I mean, in person." I studied her face, for signs of guilt, for signs of defensiveness. All I saw was discomfort. "Come in," I said finally. She stepped inside carefully, like the house might reject her. Her eyes moved around the living room, Daniel's photo on the shelf, the unopened mail, a quiet. "I didn't know how hard this would hit you," she said. That sentence again. Hit you. As if grief was something external. Like weather. "I told you," I replied calmly. She nodded quickly. "I know. I thought you were handling it. Handling it. You've always handled things." There it was again. The myth of me, the strong one. The unbreakable one. I shouldn't have to handle burying my husband alone. Her eyes filled with tears. "I know." But something in her voice told me she didn't fully. Not really. Because if she did, she would have been there. "I don't understand how you could stay at that party," I said quietly. She looked down at her hands. It felt impossible to cancel. Everyone was there. Your sister was so happy. I didn't want to ruin it. I let the words sit, so you ruined me instead. She looked up sharply. That's not fair. Neither was that day. Silence filled the room, the kind that forces honesty. Finally, she whispered, I thought you'd forgive me. Of course she did, because I always had. Because I always had. Because I always had. Because I always adjusted. Because I always chose peace over truth. I might, I said honestly. But that doesn't mean things go back to the way they were. Her face changed at that. What does that mean? It means I'm not coming to family dinners just to pretend nothing happened. It means I'm not sitting at the same table, smiling while everyone avoids the topic. It means something broke. She shook her head slowly. We can fix it, not like before. She stared at me as if she was seeing me for the first time. Maybe she was, because I wasn't speaking from pain anymore. I was speaking from clarity. Before she could respond, there was another knock at the door, this time sharper. I froze. She looked confused. I didn't come with anyone, she said. I walked to the door and opened it. Emily. Of course, still wearing that ring like it was armor. She looked from me to Mom. So you came without telling me, she snapped at her. I needed to talk to Jessica alone, Mom replied. Emily stepped inside anyway. I'm tired of being treated like the villain, she said immediately. I almost laughed. Villain, that word felt dramatic coming from her. I didn't call you a villain, I said calmly. You don't have to. It's obvious. Indeed. Yes. You've cut us off. You've made everyone uncomfortable. I folded my arms. My husband died. And mine is getting married. She shot back. The room went quiet. She hadn't meant to say it like that. But she had. Comparison. Again. Always comparison. I'm not competing with you, I said slowly. But you are punishing us, she insisted. For what? For not choosing you for one day. One day. One funeral. One burial. One goodbye. That one day, I said carefully, was the last day I would ever get with him. She didn't respond, because she couldn't argue with that. But instead of apologizing, she doubled down. You are making this about you. I felt something settle inside me, a calm that surprised even me. It is about me, for once. That shut her up. Mom looked between us nervously. We're a family, she whispered. Then act like it, I replied. Another silence. Heavy, unavoidable. Finally, Emily's voice softened slightly. What do you want from us? That question told me everything, because it meant she still saw this as negotiation, as repairable with the right answer. I wanted you there, I said. But that moment is gone. They both looked down, and for the first time, I saw something close to realization. Not fully, not deeply, but enough. You can't undo that, I continued. So the only thing left is accountability. Emily's jaw tightened. What does that look like? It looks like you stop minimizing it. It looks like you stop calling it. One day. It looks like you stop expecting me to move on for your comfort. Neither of them spoke. Because they couldn't. Because this wasn't about drama. It was about truth. Because they couldn't. Because this wasn't about drama. After a few more quiet minutes, Mom stood up. We'll give you space, she said softly. I nodded. Not as approval. Just acknowledgement. Emily hesitated before heading to the door. For a second, I thought she might say something real, something vulnerable. But instead, she just said, we didn't mean to hurt you, and left. When the door closed, the house was silent again. But something had shifted. They weren't in control anymore. Their guilt was theirs to carry, not mine to soothe, and that was the beginning of something powerful. Because when you stop chasing people, they feel the distance. And distance forces reflection. But reflection doesn't always lead to growth. Sometimes it leads to consequences. And what happened 2 months later was something none of us saw coming. 2 months after the funeral, something unexpected happened. The spotlight moved, not gently, not gradually. It shifted all at once. And for the first time in our lives, it wasn't on Emily, but not in the way anyone would have planned. It started with a phone call from someone I didn't expect. Chloe. My best friend. Or at least, she used to be. Her name on my screen made my stomach tighten. I hadn't spoken to her since the funeral. Since her message. I didn't know it would hurt you this much. I let it ring once. Twice. Then I answered. Hello. Her voice was quieter than usual. Jess. Hi. There was hesitation there. Something unfamiliar. I've been wanting to call for weeks, she continued. I didn't know what to say. That didn't stop you before, I replied calmly. Silence. That caught me off guard. Chloe wasn't used to admitting fault easily. What do you want? I asked gently. She exhaled slowly. Emily's fiancé called off the engagement. The words landed in the room like a dropped glass. What? It happened last night. I didn't know what to say, not because I felt bad, but because I didn't feel anything. Why? I finally asked. Chloe hesitated. Apparently, he saw something at the engagement party. I stayed quiet. He overheard a conversation between your parents and Emily. My heart beat a little faster. What kind of conversation? Chloe's voice dropped. They were laughing. About what? About how dramatic you were being about the funeral. The room felt very still. Chloe continued carefully. They said you'd get over it, that you always do, that you'd never really walk away. I swallowed, and he heard that. Yes, she paused, and it bothered him. That didn't surprise me. Daniel would have been bothered too. He confronted Emily later that night, Chloe said, and she told him that you were overreacting, that you've always been jealous of her milestones. Jealous. That word again. Even in grief, I was competition. He didn't like that, Chloe continued. He said if that's how she treated her own sister, what would she do to him, one day? I leaned back against the wall, not smiling, not satisfied, just aware. And he left? I asked. I asked. He said he needed space. Then he ended it this morning. I closed my eyes briefly. Life doesn't stop, that's what Emily said. Apparently, it doesn't pause for engagement rings either. Why are you telling me this? I asked. Chloe's voice cracked slightly. Because I was there that night. I opened my eyes. What? I heard it too. Silence. I didn't say anything, she admitted. I laughed along. That hurt more than the rest. Not because of the engagement, but because she laughed. I didn't realize how cruel it sounded until later. She whispered, when I saw you standing alone at the funeral, that memory wouldn't leave me. I didn't respond. Jess, I chose the party, and I was wrong. There it was. Not an excuse, not confusion, just truth. I thought you'd understand, she said. Because you always do. That phrase again. Because you always do. I exhaled slowly. Understanding doesn't mean accepting, I said quietly. I know. And being strong doesn't mean being unaffected. I know. Her voice was smaller now. Real. I don't expect things to go back to normal, she said. I just needed you to know I see it now. That was new. Not minimizing. Not defending. Seeing. I appreciate that, I said honestly. It didn't mean everything was fixed, but it meant something. After we hung up, I stood in the kitchen for a long time, processing, not celebrating, not gloating, just absorbing the truth. My silence had done more than arguing ever could. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to expose them. They exposed themselves, and people were watching. By the end of that week, relatives started reaching out. Not aggressively, just curious. An aunt texted me, I heard you've been going through a hard time. I'm sorry we weren't there. That was new. Another cousin sent flowers. No explanation. Just flowers. It wasn't about sides. It was about awareness. Because once someone points out a pattern, you can't unsee it. And Emily? Epot unsee it. And Emily? She called 3 days later. I almost didn't answer. But something told me I should. Her voice was different. Not sharp, not defensive. Just shaken. He left, she said flatly. I heard. Silence. They're all talking about it, she continued, about what happened at the party. I didn't say anything. They think I'm heartless. The irony almost hurt. You weren't heartless. I said calmly. You were careless. She inhaled sharply. That's not better. No, it's not. Silence again. I didn't think it would matter so much, she whispered. There it is, I said softly. She didn't argue, because she knew. You've always bounced back, she said quietly. I thought you would this time too. I did bounce back, I replied. Just not toward you. That hit her. I could hear it. You really meant it, she said slowly. About stepping back. Yes. Her voice cracked slightly. I didn't think you could. That sentence said everything. Not wouldn't, couldn't. She never believed I was capable of choosing myself, because I never had before. And that realization hurt her more than the breakup, because it meant something permanent had changed. I don't hate you, I said honestly. But I won't shrink anymore. The line stayed quiet. For once, she didn't have a comeback. After we hung up, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. Not because her engagement ended, but because the illusion ended. For years, I thought walking away meant losing everything. But what I learned was this. Sometimes walking away reveals who was standing on shaky ground all along. And slowly life began to rebuild. Not the old version. A new one. One where I didn't wait for validation. One where I didn't beg to be prioritized. One where grief didn't define me. It strengthened me. Daniel used to say something when we talked about the future. You teach people how to treat you. Back then, I didn't fully understand that. Now I did. But because by staying silent for years, I had taught them I would always accept second place. By stepping back, I taught them something new. That love without respect isn't love, and strength without boundaries isn't strength. It's surrender. But this story isn't about revenge in the way people expect. There was no dramatic confrontation, no public exposure, no shouting matches, just consequences. Natural, unavoidable. And what happened next was the moment my family finally understood that I wasn't coming back the same. Because 3 months later, they asked me to come to a family dine. And this time, the invitation felt very different. 3 months after Daniel's funeral, I got the message, not a call, not a long explanation. Just a simple text from my mom. Family dinner this Sunday. We'd really like you to come. I stared at the screen for a long time. 3 months ago, I would have gone immediately, eager to fix things, eager to smooth the tension, eager to prove I wasn't dramatic. But this time, I didn't answer right away. I sat with it, and I asked myself one simple question. Do I want to go? Not. Should I go up, bite? Not. Will they be upset if I don't? Just, do I want to bite? That question felt new, uncomfortable, powerful. After an hour of thinking, I replied, but I won't pretend. The 3 dots appeared almost instantly. Of course, she wrote. I knew that of course didn't mean comfort, it meant preparation. Sunday evening came faster than I expected. I stood outside my parents' house for a full minute before knocking. The same house I grew up in, the same front door, the same porch light. But I wasn't the same girl standing there. When the door opened, my dad greeted me first. His smile was cautious, like he wasn't sure which version of me would walk in. Hi, he said. Hi. I stepped inside. The smell of familiar cooking hit me. Roast chicken, garlic, potatoes. For a second, memory almost softened me. Then I saw the table. Everyone was already seated. Everyone was already seated. My mom, Emily, 2 of my aunts, and a few cousins, all of them quiet when I entered. The room felt staged, like everyone had rehearsed something. I took the empty seat at the end of the table, not beside Emily. At the end, Dad cleared his throat. We're glad you came. I nodded politely. Dinner started normally. Small talk, weather, work updates, but the tension sat heavy between every word. Eventually, my aunt spoke up. We were sorry to hear about the engagement. Emily stiffened. I'm fine, she said quickly. Silence followed. Then my mom looked at me. We've all had a difficult few months. There it was, the attempt to group everything together. To level the pain, I put my fork down gently. I don't think our months were difficult in the same way. The table went quiet. Emily shifted in her seat. I know what you're implying, she said. I'm not implying anything, I replied calmly. I'm saying grief and a breakup aren't the same. Her jaw tightened. I didn't ask him to leave, and I didn't ask Daniel to die. The words came out steady, not loud, but clear. My aunt quickly tried to redirect. Let's not compare pain. I'm not, I said softly. I'm acknowledging it. Mom reached for her water glass nervously. We invited you here to move forward. Forward where? I asked. Dad leaned forward slightly. To rebuild. Rebuild what? The room felt smaller, because for once, no one had control of the conversation. We're family, Dad said firmly. Families go through things. Yes, I agreed. But families also show up. Silence again. Emily exhaled sharply. Are you going to bring up the funeral every time? No, I said, but I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen either. That hit harder than yelling ever could, because it wasn't dramatic. It was final. My cousin finally spoke. I heard what was said at the engagement party. Emily's head snapped toward her. What? She looked uncomfortable but continued. People talk. My dad's face changed slightly, and I saw it. Embarrassment. Not for missing the funeral. For being heard. That realization told me everything. This wasn't about understanding my pain. It was about managing their image, and that used to be enough to silence me. Not anymore. I'm not here to shame anyone, I said calmly. I just needed you to understand something. They all looked at me now. When Daniel was being buried, I looked at the doors every few seconds. My voice didn't shake. I kept hoping one of you would walk in. Emily looked down. I would have forgiven everything if you had. That landed. Because it was true. I didn't need perfection. I continued. I needed presence. My mom's eyes filled with tears. Dad looked at his plate. And when you didn't come, something shifted. I paused. I stopped waiting. The room was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking on the wall. Emily finally spoke. I didn't think you would actually pull away. I know, I said gently. That's why I had to. She swallowed. I'm not used to you saying no. That's part of the problem. No anger, no sarcasm, just truth, and truth is hard to argue with. My mom finally whispered, What do you need from us now? That question felt different this time. Not defensive, not impatient, just unsure. I need consistency, I said. Not grand gestures, not speeches, just consistency. They listened. If I'm hurting, don't minimize it. If something matters to me, treat it like it matters. And don't expect me to carry the emotional weight alone. Dad nodded slowly. That's fair. Such a simple word. But I had waited my whole life to hear it. Dinner ended quieter than it began. No dramatic apologies. No hugging at the door. Just something more real. Awareness. When I stood to leave, Emily walked me to the porch. She looked tired. Different. I didn't realize how much I relied on you being steady, she admitted. I almost smiled. Steady doesn't mean unbreakable. She nodded slowly. I'm trying to understand. That's a start, I replied. We stood there for a moment, not fixed, but not pretending either. As I drove home, I realized something powerful. I didn't go to that dinner to win. I went to show them who I am now. And the most surprising part, they finally listened. Not because I yelled, not because I exposed them, but because I stopped chasing them. And sometimes the strongest revenge isn't destruction. It's growth, it's peace, it's walking into a room without needing approval, and walking out without losing yourself. But life wasn't finished testing me yet. Because just when things began to stabilize, I found something in Daniel's old office that changed everything again. Something that forced me to confront a truth I wasn't ready for. And this time, it wasn't about my family. It was about him. It happened on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. The kind of quiet that feels almost safe. I had finally decided to clean out Daniel's home office. Not because I was ready, but because avoiding it was starting to feel heavier than facing it. His office had always been his space, organized, simple. A desk by the window, a small plant he kept forgetting to water, and I kept secretly saving wood. I stood in the doorway for a full minute before stepping inside. The air still carried a faint trace of his cologne. I sat down in his chair. ran my fingers across the surface of the desk, and whispered, "Okay, let's do this." I started with the easy things: pens, old receipts, sticky notes with grocery lists. Then I opened the bottom drawer, and that's when I saw it: a sealed envelope, cream colored, my name written on it. Jessica. Not Jess. Not Babe. My Jessica. My heart started beating faster. My hands felt cold. I stared at it for a long moment before picking it up. The paper felt heavier than it should have, like it carried more than just ink. I sat back in the chair and opened it carefully. Inside was a folded letter. His handwriting. Neat. Familiar. And suddenly, everything felt fragile. I took a breath and began to read. If you're reading this, it means I didn't get to say everything I wanted to. My vision blurred immediately. I blinked, forcing myself to continue. I don't know how much time I have, but I know one thing for sure. You deserve more than you settle for. I froze. More than I settle for? I kept reading. I've watched your whole life shrink yourself to keep peace, to make others comfortable, to avoid being called dramatic. My chest tightened. He saw it. He always saw it. You think you're strong because you endure, but strength isn't about endurance. It's about boundaries. Tears rolled down my face quietly. I worry about you, not because you can't survive without me, but because you will survive quietly, and that's not the same as living fully. I pressed my hand against my mouth. He knew. I need you to promise me something. The letter continued. Stop accepting crumbs from people who should be giving you the whole table. That line broke something open inside me. Because that's exactly what I had been doing. My entire life. He ended the letter simply. I choose you, even when I am gone. So choose yourself too. I lowered the paper slowly. The room felt different now. Not haunted, not heavy. Daniel hadn't just loved me. He understood me. And that realization changed the way I saw everything, including my family, because suddenly I wasn't just reacting to the funeral anymore. I was reacting to years of small dismissals, years of adjusting, years of earning love instead of receiving it freely. And the truth hit me hard. Daniel's death didn't create the shifta. It revealed it. I wiped my face and leaned back in the chair. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was I too harsh? Hi, Joe, was I too distant? Was I turning pain into pride? But then I remembered something. I had begged. I had given chances. And when it mattered most, they weren't there. This wasn't revenge. It was alignment. It was myself. Still, the letter stirred something else. A quiet question. Had I also settled with Daniel in ways I didn't see Betchit? Not in love, but in myself. Had I depended on him to validate my worth instead of believing it on my own? That thought scared me. Because if it was true, then I had work to do. Not with my family. With me. That night, I didn't call anyone. I didn't text anyone. I sat with the letter on my lap and replayed moments from our marriage. The way Daniel encouraged me to apply for that promotion, the way he pushed me to start painting again, the way he gently challenged me when I avoided conflict. He had been preparing me, not to be alone, but to be independent, not to be alone. And suddenly, something clicked. My family had underestimated me, but so had I. The next morning, I made a decision that surprised even me. I signed up for a weekend art workshop, something I had talked about for years, something I always postponed because someone else needed something first. This time, I didn't ask anyone's opinion. I just did it, and something small but powerful shifted. Because every choice forward now felt intentional, not reactive, not defensive, just chosen. A week later, my mom called. Not about dinner, not about Emily, just to check in. How are you? She asked gently. I thought about it. Growing, I replied. She was quiet for a second ride. That's good. And for once, she didn't add advice, didn't redirect, didn't compare. Maybe she was growing too. Or maybe she was just cautious. Either way, it felt different. Later that evening, I took Daniel's letter and placed it in a small wooden box on my nightstand. Not hidden, not displayed. Just kept, because it wasn't a goodbye. It was a reminder. And here's the truth I didn't expect to admit. Part of me was grateful, and not for losing him. Never that. Because sometimes it takes losing your anchor to realize you can swim. But just when I thought the hardest part was behind me, life surprised me again. Not with betrayal, not with abandonment, but with opportunity. An opportunity that would test whether I truly believed the words Daniel left me, because 2 weeks later, I got an offer that would change my entire future. And accepting it meant stepping even further away from the life I used to beg to keep. The email came on a Thursday afternoon. I almost ignored it. I had just gotten home from work, kicked off my shoes, and was standing in the kitchen staring at the fridge without really seeing it. Grief does that sometimes. You function, but you drift. My phone buzzed on the counter. Subject line: regarding your application. For a second, I didn't understand what it meant. Then I remembered. 3 weeks earlier, the same week I found Daniel's letter, I had applied for a regional creative director position at a company in another city, 2 hours away, far enough to feel new, close enough to not feel like escape. At the time, I hadn't expected anything. I almost applied just to prove to myself that I could. My hands felt slightly unsteady as I opened the email. I read it once, then again, then a third time. They were offering me the position. Higher salary, more responsibility, full creative control over a new division. Start date in 6 weeks. I sank into a chair 2 hours away. New city, new apartment, new routines. No weekly family dinners. No familiar grocery store aisles filled with memories of Daniel. No house filled with echoes. This wasn't just a job offer. It was a line in the sand. And for the first time in my life, I didn't immediately think about how this decision would affect everyone else. I thought about how it would affect me. That realization alone felt revolutionary. My first instinct was to call Daniel. That still hadn't changed. Was to call Daniel. Every good moment still reached for him first. I glanced toward the wooden box on my nightstand from across the room. You deserve more than you settle for. His words echoed quietly. Was staying here settling, or was leaving running away? That question lingered. So instead of answering it immediately, I did something I had never done before. I sat in silence and imagined both versions of my future. Version 1. I stay. I keep the job I know. I slowly repair things with my family. I visit Daniel's grave every Sunday. Life becomes predictable. Safe, contained. Version 2. I leave. I build something new. I wake up somewhere that doesn't hold constant reminders. I risk loneliness. I risk growth. My heart beat faster thinking about the second one, not with fear, with energy. That was my answer. Growth is uncomfortable. Staying small is suffocating. That evening, I drove to my parents' house, not for permission, not for approval, just to inform them. Mom opened the door. She looked surprised. Everything okay? Yes, I said calmly. I got a job offer. Her face lit up immediately. Oh, sweetheart, that's wonderful. It's in Brookhaven. Her smile paused. That's far. 2 hours. She blinked. So you did move. Yes. The word felt steady in my mouth. Dad stepped into the hallway. What's this about moving? I repeated the offer. He listened quietly. And you want to take it? He asked. I do. He nodded slowly. That's a big step. Yes. Mom's expression shifted slightly. What about us? She asked softly. That question would have once sent me spiraling. What about them? What about holidays? What about Emily? What about tradition? But now it landed differently. I'm not disappearing, I said gently. I'm growing. Emily walked into the hallway mid-conversation. What's going on? Jessica got a job offer, Mom said. 2 hours away. Emily's face changed. You're leaving. I met her eyes. I'm moving. For how long? I don't know. Our voice sharpened slightly. So that's it. You just start over somewhere else? There was a hint of accusation there, not because she wanted to stop me, but because she wasn't used to me choosing something that didn't revolve around her orbit. I'm not running, I said calmly. I'm building. Silence followed. Dad finally spoke. You should take it. Everyone looked at him. He shrugged slightly. Opportunities don't wait forever. That surprised me. Mom looked conflicted. Emily looked unsettled, but no one told me not to go, and that alone told me how much had changed. On the drive home, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: excitement. Not loud, not overwhelming, but real. The next morning, I accepted the offer, and just like that, the future shifted. The following weeks moved quickly: packing boxes, sorting through furniture, deciding what to keep, what to donate, what to let go. Daniel's clothes were the hardest, but instead of collapsing into grief, I found myself smiling at certain memories. Talking to him softly while folding a shirt. "You'd like this city," I whispered once, and somehow I believed that. The night before moving day, my family came over to help load boxes. Not out of obligation, out of effort. Emily carried books down the stairs quietly. Mom wrapped dishes carefully. Dad secured furniture in the truck. No dramatic speeches. No emotional breakdowns. Just presence. It wasn't perfect, but it was different. And different was enough. Before leaving, I walked through the empty house one last time. The walls echoed. The rooms felt lighter. This house had held love. It had also held lessons. I stood in the living room and closed my eyes. "Thank you," I whispered softly. Not just to Daniel, but to myself. Because I didn't beg anyone to stop. Because I didn't beg anyone to stop. Me. I didn't shrink the opportunity to make others comfortable. I chose. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror, not at the house, but at myself, and for the first time in years, I didn't see the strong one, the quiet one, the understanding one. I saw a woman rebuilding her life on her own terms, and that felt like justice. But the real test wasn't leaving. It was what happened after I arrived. Because growth doesn't erase grief, it challenges it. And in Brookhaven, I was about to discover whether I truly believed I deserved more. Because sometimes, when you finally stop begging to be chosen, life sends you something unexpected, something that forces you to decide whether your heart is ready to open again. And I wasn't prepared for what, or who, was waiting for me there. Brookhaven didn't feel magical. It felt unfamiliar. And sometimes, unfamiliar is more powerful than magical. The first night in my new apartment, I sat on the floor surrounded by half-open boxes and silence that didn't carry history, no echoes, no memories in the walls, no shadows of the past, just space. And space can be terrifying or freeing. I hadn't decided which yet. The first few weeks were exhausting. New office, new team, new expectations. But something strange happened. No one here knew me as the strong one. No one compared me to Emily. No one knew about the funeral, or the engagement party, or the family dinner. I wasn't anyone's past. I was just Jessica. And that felt like oxygen. My new role demanded confidence, decisions, leadership. And instead of shrinking, I stepped forward. I spoke up in meetings. I trusted my instincts. I didn't apologize for having opinions. And each time I did, I felt Daniel's letter echo in my mind. "You deserve more than you settle for." One afternoon, about a month into the job, something unexpected happened. I stayed late at the office, reviewing campaign drafts. Most of the building was quiet. Just the hum of air conditioning and distant footsteps. I was packing up my laptop when a voice startled me. "Burning the midnight oil." I looked up. A man stood in the doorway. Mid-30s maybe. Dark hair. Raven soft eyes. Casual but professional. "I guess so," I replied. He smiled slightly. "I'm Mark, Finance Department. We haven't officially met." I stood and shook his hand. "Jessica." "I know," he said lightly. "The new creative director everyone's talking about." I raised an eyebrow. "Good things, I hope." "Mostly fear," he joked. I laughed. It surprised me. The sound felt unfamiliar in this building. We talked for a few minutes. About work, about adjusting to the city. Nothing personal, nothing heavy. But as I walked to my car that night, something lingered. It wasn't attraction exactly. It was ease. And ease felt dangerous. Because ease leads to openness. And openness leads to risk. I told myself it was nothing. Just friendly. Just new. But over the next few weeks, Mark kept appearing. Coffee machine. Elevator rides, lunchroom conversations. Never forced, never intrusive, just consistent. One afternoon, he asked casually, would you want to grab coffee sometime? Outside of work? There it was. Simple. Direct. My heart reacted before my brain did, and immediately guilt followed. Daniel, the thought hit fast. Was I allowed to feel this? Allowed to move forward? Allowed to let someone new look at me like that? Mark must have seen something change in my expression. No pressure, he added quickly. It's just coffee. Coffee, not a future, not a promise. Just coffee. I'll think about it, I said honestly. He nodded. Fair enough. That night I pulled Daniel's letter out of the wooden box. I read the last line again. I choose you, even when I'm gone. So choose yourself too. Choosing myself didn't mean replacing him. It meant allowing life to continue. And wasn't that what he would have wanted? The next morning, I found Mark near the elevators. I'll take that coffee, I said. His smile was small but genuine. Saturday, Saturday, Saturday came with nerves I didn't expect. Not because of Mark, but because of what it represented. Permission. We met at a small cafe downtown. Permission, we met at a small cafe downtown. We talked for hours. About careers, travel. About careers, travel, childhood memories. He didn't pry about my past. He didn't flirt aggressively. He just listened. And when I mentioned Daniel, gently, without details, he didn't freeze. He didn't pity me. He simply said, that must have been hard. Not dramatic, not dismissive, just acknowledgement. I felt my shoulders relax. After coffee, we walked outside. The air was cool, comfortable. Can I ask you something? He said carefully. Sure. Are you ready for something new? The question wasn't about dating. It was about readiness. And I appreciated that. I don't know, I admitted. That's honest. I'm not looking to replace anyone. I wouldn't want you to. That answer mattered, because he wasn't competing with a ghost. He wasn't trying to step into someone else's shadow. He was offering something separate, something new. That night, lying in bed, I didn't feel guilt. I felt possibility, and that scared me more than grief ever had. Because grief is familiar, hope is risky. Over the next few weeks, Mark and I kept seeing each other, slowly, carefully, no rushing, no pressure. And the most surprising part, Ivy, my family reacted differently than I expected. When I told my mom casually over the phone, she paused. Then she said softly, Fivey, in a way, not controlling, not suspicious, just glad. Emily's reaction surprised me even more. That's good, she said, and she meant it. There was no competition in her voice, no comparison. Maybe heartbreak had humbled her, or maybe distance had changed all of us. One evening, Mark asked if I wanted to visit a small art exhibit in town. I almost laughed at the timing. Art, the workshop I signed up for. The part of myself I had postponed for years. We walked through the gallery slowly, stopping at paintings, discussing colors, emotions, meaning. At one abstract piece filled with deep blues and gold streaks, Mark said quietly, Flad, this feels like rebuilding. I looked at him. Why? Because it's not trying to erase the dark. It's just adding light. That sentence stayed with me. Because that's exactly what my life felt like. Not erasing Daniel. Not erasing my family. Just adding something new. Later that night, as we stood outside my apartment building, he hesitated. Can I kiss you? He didn't move closer. He waited. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. For the first time in my life, I wasn't shrinking. I wasn't adjusting. I wasn't saying yes because someone else expected it. I was choosing. I'd like that, I said softly. The kiss wasn't dramatic. It wasn't overwhelming. It was gentle, respectful, present. And when he pulled back, I didn't feel guilt. I felt alive. Not replacing, not betraying, just living. And that's when I understood something fully for the first time. My family's betrayal had broken something in me, but it also forced me to rebuild correctly, with boundaries, with clarity, with choice. Because if they had shown up that day, maybe I would have continued shrinking quietly. Maybe I would have stayed in that old house. Maybe I wouldn't have taken the job. Maybe I wouldn't have met Mark. And that realization changed the narrative completely. The funeral was, as in at the end of my story, it was the turning point. But there was still one last step left. One final moment of closure I didn't know I needed. Because 6 months after I moved, I went back home. Not for dinner, not for obligation, but for something much bigger. And what happened that day finally closed the chapter for good. 6 months after I moved to Brookhaven, I went back home. Not because I was called, not because someone needed me, not because I felt guilty. I went back because I wanted to. That difference mattered more than anyone else realized. The drive felt familiar, but distant at the same time. The roads hadn't changed. The exits were the same. But I wasn't the same woman driving them. I didn't feel small. I didn't feel anxious. I didn't feel anxious. I didn't rehearse conversations in my head. I just drove. I stopped by the cemetery first. I hadn't visited Daniel's grave since I moved. Not because I was avoiding it, but because I stopped believing that love lived in a single place. Still, I wanted to see it again. The sky was clear that day, soft blue, quiet. His name was carved into the stone simply. The Daniel Hayes, beloved husband. I stood there for a long moment. No dramatic tears. No collapse, just presence. I did it, I said softly. The wind moved lightly through the trees. I took the job. I moved. I stopped begging. My voice didn't break. I met someone. That part still felt fragile to say out loud, but it felt honest. I think you'd like him. I smiled slightly. I'm not replacing you. I'm expanding. The word felt right, expanding, because grief doesn't shrink when you love again. It shifts. It softens. I finally understand what you meant, I whispered. About choosing myself, for the first time since he was buried. I didn't feel like I was standing at the end of something. I felt like I was standing in the middle of something new. After leaving the cemetery, I drove to my parents' house. They knew I was coming this time. Not for dinner. Not for confrontation. Just to visit. When I walked in, the energy was different. Lighter. Not because everything was perfect, but because expectations had changed. Mom hugged me gently, not clingy, not apologetic, just gentle. Dad smiled. Emily walked in from the kitchen. We made eye contact, and instead of tension, there was acknowledgement. Growth doesn't erase history, it reframes it. We sat in the living room for a while, talking about small things. Work, Brookhaven, life. At one point, Mom said quietly, "Fads. You seem different." I smiled. Emily studied me for a second. "Better different," she said. There was no sarcasm in her voice, just truth. Later that afternoon, something happened that felt small, but meant everything. Emily asked me for advice, not validation, not approval, advice. "I've been thinking about going back to school," she said. "I'm not sure what I actually want." That was new. For the first time in her life, she wasn't chasing applause. She was questioning direction. "What do you want?" I asked. She shrugged slightly. "I don't know. Something that feels mine." Mine. I understood that feeling now. "I think that's a good place to start," I said. She nodded slowly, and for once it didn't feel like competition. It felt like two adults in the same room. Later, as the sun started to set, Dad walked me outside to my car. He hesitated for a moment. "I was wrong," he said quietly. The words were simple, but they carried weight. I should have been there. I looked at him, not as the authority figure from my childhood, but as a man capable of reflection. "Yes," I said honestly. He nodded once. "I see that now. That was enough. I didn't need tears. I didn't need a speech. I needed recognition, and I got it." Before getting into my car, I turned back toward the house. For years, that house represented something heavy. Expectation, comparison, adjustment. Now, it just looked like a house. No power over me, no emotional debt, just walls and windows. I drove back to Brookhaven that evening with a strange sense of calm, not because everything was fixed, but because I wasn't carrying it anymore. That night, Mark was waiting at my apartment, takeout containers on the table, soft music playing. "How was it?" he asked. I sat down across from him. "It was complete." He tilted his head slightly. "Complete how?" "Like I closed a door without slamming it." He smiled. "That sounds healthy." I laughed lightly. "It feels healthy." And that's when it hit me. Revenge doesn't always look like destruction. Sometimes it looks like evolution. My family didn't crumble because I left. They adjusted, they learned, they reflected. And I did too. The greatest revenge wasn't making them feel what I felt. It was refusing to stay where I wasn't valued. It was building a life so solid that their absence couldn't shake it. It was loving again without apology. It was walking into rooms without shrinking. It was understanding that strength isn't silence, it's boundaries. A few weeks later, something symbolic happened. I hosted dinner in my apartment in Brookhaven. I invited my parents, Emily, and Mark, not as a test, not as a performance, but as integration. The past meeting the present. They came. They sat at my table, and no one tried to control the narrative. No one minimized. No one compared. Mark fit into the conversation easily. Emily asked him about his work. Dad asked about the city. Mom complimented my cooking. It wasn't perfect, but it was respectful. And respect was the missing piece all along. That night, after everyone left, I stood alone in my kitchen, the dishes stacked, the lights dim, and I thought back to the chapel, to the closed casket, to the empty doors, to the 36 missed calls. If someone had told me then that I would feel this steady one day, I wouldn't have believed them, because in that moment, I felt abandoned. Invisible, replaceable. But here's what I learned: being abandoned doesn't make you worthless, it reveals who values you. Being invisible doesn't make you small, it shows you where you're unseen. And being replaced, it teaches you to replace the environments that don't honor you. Losing Daniel broke me. That's true. But being abandoned by my family forced me to rebuild in a way I never would have otherwise. And sometimes, pain is the doorway to self-respect. If you're listening to this right now and you have ever stood in a room waiting for someone to show up, if you've ever felt second place in your own life, if you've ever been called strong when what you really were, there's was hurting, hear me clearly. You are not dramatic for expecting presence. You are not selfish for needing support. And you are not wrong for walking away from people who couldn't show up when it mattered most. Family is not defined by blood, it's defined by choice. And the moment you stop begging to be chosen, you begin choosing yourself. That's where everything changes. That's where healing begins. And that's where your real story starts. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever rebuilt yourself after betrayal, if you know what it feels like to be underestimated and then rise anyway, make sure you subscribe. Because these stories aren't just about revenge, they're about reclamation. And your worth, it was never up for negotiation.